Hello and welcome to the Roundup by News of the Week, the show where I, Jake Whitwell, summarise and explain the news, helping you to stay informed. You might have noticed I've sort of changed the environment again this week, and that's because I've moved home from uni. Woo! Fun! But I've had to sort of hastily put together an area to sort of film. But there's loads to talk about this week, from things like Labour policy reversals to a trade deal with the EU and Israel permitting basic food into Gaza. As always, though, there's a lot more than that, so you should keep watching to find out and stay informed. Without further ado, though, I'll get on to the news now, starting with policy change, where The Independent reported criminals could fill in potholes under Labour's plans. Reports this week have suggested that criminals sentenced to less than a year in prison could avoid jail by serving community sentences instead. These sort of practices like filling in potholes could form part of that sentence, and as well as things like treatment options for addiction to alcohol, drugs, or some other addiction. When these community services things happen at the moment, it's usually in charity shops and non-profit organisations like that, but it's thought this could be expanded to supermarkets as well as other private businesses, and as well, like the headline bit, to fill in potholes for local council or scrub off graffiti. And this comes after an independent review by the Justice Secretary Shaban Mahmood looking at overcrowding issues in prisons, and it's thought this could be a way of lessening the reliance on traditional prison sentences. The Times covered other parts of her review, which I just talked about. In other parts of her review, she was looking at things like giving courts greater powers to expand bans on travel, for going to football matches or using social media, even if sentences and offences were unrelated. Another change apparently being considered is an expansion of early release schemes, the type of which we saw in August, even for violence such dangerous prisoners who have been deemed safe by a parole board this time. But one the Times picked out to report on in their headline was the use of chemical castration on prisoners serving sentences of crimes like things with children. I think that's probably as much as I can say. This recommendation, for what it's worth, was made by a former Conservative Justice Secretary, but in that recommendation it was always with the express consent of the guilty person. It has been trialled in a capacity where they were also giving consent. Here it seems like they wouldn't necessarily go for the consent, they would do it as part of their punishment. Going away from that, BBC News detailed warnings have been issued over tax rises after borrowing was higher than expected. Borrowing hit £2.2 billion in April, which is up from the £1 billion this time last year, according to official figures. This prompted warnings from experts that the prospect of tax rises in the autumn budget have increased. One expert, Ruth Gregory of Capital Economics, said that tax rises were starting to feel inevitable. LBC noted millions of teachers and doctors are set to receive a 4% pay rise. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has accepted the recommendations of the pay review bodies, which are the independent people that set the recommendations for public service workers' pay rises, and that recommendation will see public sector workers getting rises of 4% on average. Junior and resident doctors, along with the armed forces, teachers, consultants and prison officers, will all get the 4% pay rise. Most staff in the NHS, though, will get a slightly lower pay rise at 3.6%, while civil servants will get a pay rise of 3.75%. The 2.8% that was budgeted for is lower, obviously, than the 4% being given out. However, unions were threatening action if there was going to be 2.8% awarded. The Eye detailed the two-child benefit cap is supposedly going to be watered down. Keir Starmer's Child Poverty Task Force, set up in July, has secured the funding from the Treasury to make changes to the policy, which caused a rebellion on the Labour backbenches last year. Well, it's thought the funding would not cover a full reversal of the child benefit cap, but it will limit the cap's impact by increasing the threshold where people will lose access to child benefit. It's thought there are splits in the cabinet over that measure, though, with the Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, being against the move, while others in the cabinet like Bridget Phillipson, Liz Kendall and Keir Starmer are all on board. In any case, it will be part of a wider package to mitigate the measures of child poverty in this country. Although it's been criticised by campaigners for not going far enough, they believe that a full ban on or a full reversal of the cap needs to be put in place. Conversely to this, though, and somewhat confusingly, if we're led to believe that first headline, which came up earlier on in the week, the Guardian detailed Number 10 has delayed its child poverty strategy, with tens of thousands of children, according to them, more likely or being pushed into hardship as a result of that delay. Labour's plan to tackle child poverty, which is apparently a personal priority for Starmer, has been delayed until the autumn, as we're led to believe. The delay is a result of a combination of concerns in the Treasury over the cost of the measure and in the government over the political gains it might have. It's thought that the cost of it politically, by it being seen as unfair, that people who maybe could afford to go without the benefit and would now receive it. That's seen as unfair. It's thought that that could outweigh the political benefit they could get in terms of reducing child poverty. Despite that, like I just said, both Liz Kendall and Bridget Phillipson, the people behind Labour's child poverty strategy, are supposedly in favour of removing the child benefit cap. Alison Graham, the chief exec of Child Poverty Action Group, who we just talked about, said the 109 children a day will be pushed into poverty while the two-child benefit cap remains, and that the government cannot keep waiting for the stars to align. They must act urgently to invest in children and their families. Anyway, that's all the news I got on policy change. I'm going to now move on to foreign policy. I'm going to move on to foreign policy now. The Guardian reported that the UK has suspended its trade talks with Israel, with David Lammy calling the blockade of aid going on there morally wrong and unjustifiable. Okay, that was getting on my nerves, so I've just taken it off. Lammy condemned the refusal of aid and called it an affront to the values of the British people, which is incompatible to maintain the values which underpin the relationship between Israel and Britain. He's basically saying that the relationship with Israel and Britain is built on values which are incompatible with the way they are acting in Gaza. ITV News noted that the UK has unveiled 100 new sanctions on Russia to ramp up pressure on their military and their exports. After Russia hit Ukraine with a drone attack of 273 drones last week, the UK revealed 100 new sanctions on Russia. It's supposed to target supply chains in Russia for their weapons. The sanctions also target 14 members of Russia's social design agency, which carries out information operations for the country. LBC noted the UK and the EU have reached a new 12-year reset deal. Talks reportedly went down to the wire last week, but they resulted in an agreement nonetheless. The main talking points seem to be over fishing, where EU countries will have continued access to British waters, and the UK has secured a improved deal for trading food and agricultural products. As part of this, we will have to accept the EU's rules on food, but it's thought that this will have a good impact. More than that, though, the British military firms will be able to access a £150 billion billion euro defence fund, and will allow Brits to use e-gates faster. This is unrelated. They will allow Brits to use e-gates faster for faster check-ins at EU airports. Some terms are still being discussed, like the highly reported on youth mobility scheme, or some other parts which could involve measures to tackle illegal migration. It's a little bit like the US deal we had a few weeks ago, where it's more of one of those sorts of heads of terms deals. Some of the concessions have prompted backlash from other parties, with both the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch and the Reform leader Nigel Farage calling the deal a surrender. I think there was also mention of it being a betrayal of the Brexit vote as well, but that wasn't in that article. BBC News noted the UK has signed a £101 million a year deal to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The government has brokered a deal under threat of Mauritian legal action, which supposedly could have interfered with operations at the Diego Garcia base. Now, it's being reported now that would have allowed other nations to have built structures too close to the base to effectively operate there. Anyway, the deal will set up a 24-mile buffer zone between the base and the rest of the islands, where nothing can be built on without UK consent. The deal sees the islands being handed to Mauritians in terms of their sovereignty, and then the UK will have to lease the military base back from Mauritius for a cost of 101 million for 99 years. Now, Keir Starmer has said the net cost will be £3.4 billion, adjusting for inflation. However, there has to be some quite significant savings there, because I worked out 101 million times 99 will be 9,999 million. Put simply, there has to be savings of around £6.5 billion somewhere. There is an option for a 40-year extension if agreed upon by both sides. The deal was signed after it was given assent by Trump, but it won't be enforced until after it's been approved by both the UK and the Mauritian parliaments. And that comes after a last-minute legal challenge led by two Chagossian women and protests outside from other Chagossian people. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I heard it was met by praise by the Mauritian government, who will now be able to implement resettlement schemes, but it's been met with strong critique from British politicians at home. Kemi Badenoch said only Labour would negotiate a deal where we have to pay to give something away. She also commented that said the vital military base will be in the hands of Mauritius, who are an ally of China, which sort of suggested some national security concerns. Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, said Starmer cares more about foreign courts than he does about Britain's national interest, referring to the supposed legal action Britain could face or could have faced from Mauritius over not doing the deal. It's worth noting that recently, or in the last few years, Britain has come under growing pressure to enact the deal after negotiations were started by the Conservatives, albeit under different terms. Nevertheless, The Guardian detailed talks have started over the recognition of a Palestinian state. The talk started this Friday over the possibility of recognition. Lamy spoke to the Israeli foreign minister about the blockage of aid, which we reported on just before. The French foreign minister said they were determined to recognise Palestine as a state. These developments come ahead of a UN-sponsored conference starting in New York next month. It should be noted, though, that the Israeli government are opposed to a two-state solution, and the USA foreign officials have recently asked whether there needs to be a Palestinian state. Anyway, that's all the news I got on foreign policy news. I'm going to move on to other political news in the UK now. Alright, moving on to other politics. The Independent noted Kemi Badenoch has been accused of wearing transphobia as a badge of honour by a Labour MP. While MPs were discussing a petition which called for the ability of trans people to self-identify, Labour MP Richard Quigley, I think that's how it's pronounced, the MP for the Isle of Wight, said it was disheartening to see figures, including the Leader of the Opposition, appear to wear transphobia as a badge of honour. He said we must not forget that words matter and that they can have an impact on the most vulnerable. He also said he'd come into politics to champion the minorities and give a voice to the voiceless. The spokesperson of the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, said she has always defended the rights of trans people, but that those rights cannot come at the expense of the rights of women and girls. The spokesperson continued, saying the issue has been consistently exploited by people who misrepresent the issue for their own political gain. The Independent also reported on protesters rallying against the government's schools bill. The schools bill, which Labour says will expand free breakfast clubs, restricts uniform cost, and put a qualified teacher in front of every classroom, also has provisions to limit branded uniform and restrict home education. Protests featured chants of 2468, educate not legislate, and hey ho, this stupid bill has got to go. The protesters were taking action over what they called an ideological bill which would harm children. It also seems like they specifically took issue with the things like the restrictions on parents' rights to home educate their children, not random children. The Telegraph covered a leaked memo from Angela Rayner, who urged Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, to strip middle-class families of of their child benefit. Rainer's proposals would see the benefit withdrawn for households where the highest earner's salary was between £50,000 and £80,000. The same memo proposed 8 other tax rises and benefit restrictions for recently arrived migrants. Ex-Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who said warned Labour against reversing it. He said that it was one of the Conservatives' most popular measures because it helped middle-class families with their childcare. Sky News noted Keir Starmer has apologised to the Plaid Cymru MP Liz Saville-Roberts for being overly rude in a previous PMQ's Prime Minister's Questions. Last week, the Prime Minister responded to comments made by Ms Saville, saying she was talking rubbish, or I think it was absolute rubbish. She was critiquing the PM's seemingly switched position from being welcoming to immigrants to now taking up the need for control to stop the UK becoming an island of strangers. After Starmer's reactions, he expressed that her words had touched a nerve, and further that many Labour MPs knew she was right about him switching his position. Starmer said this week that he thinks he was overly rude to the MP, and so he apologised, adding that he does respect her. The Independent detailed proposals to protect creatives' work from unfair AI use has been rejected by MPs. Peers in the House of Lords attempted to amend the Data Use and Access Bill to add a commitment to introduce transparency requirements for creatives, which is designed to protect them from their work being misused and them not knowing about it. It was vetoed by a majority of 71 in the House of Commons. The Technology Secretary Peter Kyle said that the amendment pitted one side against the other, which is unnecessarily divisive and damaged both sides. He said instead that he would set up a series of expert working groups to find a workable way of benefiting both industries. He also said that the proper way to ensure that both industries can grow sustainably as Britain needs is by its standalone piece of legislation rather than an amendment on another piece of somewhat irrelevant legislation. And that concluded the news I got on other political news this week. I'm going to now move on to global news. Okay, I'm moving on to global news now, but I'm going to continue to hold this because it's actually kind of a lot more comfortable than having it like pressed up against my neck. So let's see how this goes. I had some news on Russia and Ukraine first, where BBC News reported Zelensky has accused Russia of buying time to try and stall the prospect of peace talks. Vladimir Zelensky has accused Russia of trying to buy time over implementing unrealistic conditions on talks to try and undermine the process and progress made so far. He said there must be tough consequences for this, and that came after Putin said he was ready to work on a memorandum for the possible future peace deal. He did not address calls for a 30-day ceasefire and downplayed suggestions that a deal was anywhere near close or that it could be struck at any time. The Mirror noted Putin has amassed troops near the border, warning of a pre-summer attack. Ukraine intelligence suggested that Russia is massing troops near Kharkiv to ready a pre-summer attack. It's feared these forces will be used to further their position as leverage in peace talks to create a bit of a buffer zone. It's made more scary by the development of fibre optic drones, which cannot be jammed electronically. In other global news, The Telegraph covered comments from Germany's Chancellor Merz, who said that Germany must have a stronger army than Britain. Merz committed to spending 5% of its annual GDP on defence, speaking in the German parliament, saying that the German army should become the strongest in Europe. The foreign minister said he will commit the 5% spending Donald Trump has demanded, and their 5% target is double that of the UK's 2.5% promised spending on defence. It's reported there are also multiple plans for conscription if a new voluntary scheme just implemented does not draw enough recruits. CNN noted a foreign judge has halted the Trump administration's ban on Harvard's ability to enroll international students. US District Judge Alison Burroughs ruled against the Trump administration's ban. The nation's oldest and wealthiest college filed suit against the government, arguing the ban was clear retaliation for its refusal of the ideological policy demands by the Trump administration. The same judge which presided over the case is the judge considering The Trump administration's freeze of federal funding, which is reportedly £2.6 billion. £2.6 billion, if I don't drop my microphone. The Independent detailed British diplomats were among 25 fired on by Israeli troops during a visit to the West Bank. A Foreign Office minister demanded that Israel hold an investigation after the diplomats were caught up in a shooting. The group were later confirmed safe with no injuries. The Israeli military said the group had wandered off from its approved route, at which point the IDF fired warning shots to push them back into the area. The IDF did apologise and said it would contact all countries involved. BBC News reported the US has accepted a gifted Qatari plane to join the Air Force One fleet. A chief Pentagon spokesperson said the Secretary of Defense accepted a Boeing 747 from Qatar in accordance with all federal rules and regulations. The White House maintaining the gift was legal. It has an estimated worth of $400 million and will be transferred immediately to the US Presidential Library at the end of Donald Trump's term. There is some debate as to whether the gift is legal or whether it needs congressional approval. This is because of a clause in the US Constitution called the Emoluments Clause, big word, which prohibits gifts to public officials without the congressional approval. But the government are saying it was not a gift to Trump personally as a public official, so it is legal. It was a gift to the office of the president. Times reported that Israel will allow basic food into Gaza after strikes killed more than 100 people. Israel said it would allow basic food into the region if Hamas showed willingness to disarm and go into exile. The seemingly progressive announcement came amid some of the heaviest bombing of the war, which killed 103 Palestinians after hitting a hospital in northern Gaza. To go further than this, it seems there was a disagreement between the two sides over how a ceasefire deal would be struck and negotiated. Israel seems to favour the Witkoff framework and are pursuing the terms noted above, while Hamas seem to be negotiating differently under a different framework and are reportedly open to returning the hostages in return for Israel leaving Gaza. Anyway, that concluded the news I got on global news, so I'll move on to the news on stats and trends and all the fun figures now. The Independent reported Reform UK has strengthened its polling lead, with the Conservatives dropping down to fourth place. Farage's party had the backing of 29% of the population, up 1% from last week. Labour was on 22%, coincidentally down 1% from last week, followed by the Lib Dems on 17% and the Conservatives following along on 16% of the popular opinion. The former Tory Cabinet Minister Dame Priti Patel said the polling was not surprising, but that the Tory party were taking action to restore the long-term confidence of the British public. Former Deputy PM and Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg said the government must start selling their plans for government to voters to try and persuade them and arrest their popularity decline. The Times reported that half of Labour's voters back the Supreme Court's ruling on biological sex. Polling by YouGov found that across all voter groups, the majority of people thought that the court's ruling was correct. 50% of Labour voters backed it, while less than a third deemed it wrong. Broken down into age categories, though, there was a more distinct divide, with 31% of under 24-year-olds backing the ruling, with 72% of 50 to 60-year-olds backing the ruling. In any case, MPs who opposed it would likely be going against their constituents overall. Other polling by the charity Sex Matters found that 62% of Labour voters backed sporting bodies banning transgender women. Maya Forstater, the chief exec of Sex Matters, said that the polling shows that many UK organisations like the NHS are wildly out of touch with the public opinion. LBC detailed net migration in the UK has fallen by around a half and is now at 431,000 in 2024 compared to the year before. Net migration levels fell by almost half between December 23 and 2024, while small boat crossings increased. The sharp decline was caused by reduced immigration from non-EU countries for work/study and an increase in emigration, according to the ONS. These factors have been attributed to the Conservative government, the prior Conservative government, and their strict migration rules, as well as the impact of COVID-19. However, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said the 300,000 drop since the election is important and welcomed. That concludes the news I got on Stats and Trend. In non-political news then, Sky News noted a migrant has been jailed after helping smuggle more than 3,000 others into the UK and Europe. The Egyptian national Ahmed Ramadan Mohammed Abid arrived in a small boat in 2022 and helped many other illegal migrants into the UK and other countries in Europe. It is reported he arranged boats to carry 12,000 illegal migrants in just 6 months. He's believed to be the first in Britain to be arrested and charged for smuggling migrants and has been sentenced to 25 years in prison. The operation supposedly made him £12 million to date as well. The Standard noted a man has been arrested after arson attack. A third man has been arrested after arson attacks on Keir Starmer's property. The third man was arrested on suspicion of arson over attacks at two properties and a car owned by Keir Starmer. The man was 34 and from Chelsea in London. This comes after the arrest of a 26-year-old man and the sentencing of a 21-year-old Ukrainian man who was charged with three counts of arson with the intent to endanger life in connection with the fires. And that concluded the news I got on non-political news. So I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this episode useful or maybe entertaining. If you did and you thought it was good, please leave a like and subscribe, as well as comment what you liked about it down below. That helps me greatly in making this every single week, or as many weeks as I can. If you thought there's anything I got wrong or would like to, challenge me on something, please put it in the comments below. Or if you had anything else to say, if it was about my glasses, 4 eyes, or silly haircut, then you're more than welcome to say that as well. Thank you. Bye. Have a good week.